For people who haven't been following this really closely, um, what makes you suspicious of your stepdad? I mean, what raises the alarm bells?
Um, for one, he's already made this threat 2 years ago that this exact thing was going to happen to her, that he would make sure this would happen to her. And he's threatened it, I'm pretty sure, multiple times and has done actions to her that have hurt her. So the fact that this is happening now is kind of coincidental, I guess, or it's just funny because you said that you were going to do this and now it's happening. So why wouldn't I just believe your story? I would need more answers than just believing your story at this point.
The ocean off the coast of the Bahamas does not keep secrets gently. It swallows them whole. On the night of April 4th, 2026, the pitch-black waters of the Sea of Abaco became the staging ground for a mystery that would slowly untangle over 81 grueling days, transforming from a desperate marine rescue into a chilling, multi-front federal murder investigation. It began not with a frantic radio transmission or a panic scream cutting through the Caribbean night, but with a silent electronic blackout. The automatic identification system aboard the Soulmate, a majestic 46-foot sailboat that had become a permanent, floating home for an American couple, suddenly stopped transmitting. For 11 critical hours, as the tides shifted between Hope Town and Elbow Key, the vessel went dark to the rest of the world. When the silence was finally broken hours later, it was on dry land, miles away at a secluded boatyard in Marsh Harbor. A security guard scanning the perimeter in the dim pre-dawn light of 4:00 a.m. encountered a towering, white-haired man staggering out of the shadows. The man was Brian Hooker, a retired Marine whose imposing 6'4" frame appeared entirely withered by exhaustion. Parched and trembling, he begged the guard for water before delivering a devastating declaration. His 55-year-old wife, Lynette Hooker, was gone. She had fallen off their 8-foot hard-bottom dinghy into the unforgiving ocean hours earlier, swallowed by violent, roaring seas. Brian claimed he had spent the last 9 hours drifting helplessly across the vast expanse of the Sea of Abaco, trapped in a disabled boat, watching his wife drift into oblivion. He claimed he fired 2 emergency flares into the empty sky, but no one came. As the sun rose over the Bahamas, an unprecedented, full-scale search operation mobilized with desperate urgency. The Royal Bahamas Police Force deployed patrol fleets, the Defense Force swept the coastlines, and local volunteer rescue teams launched drones to scan the glittering surface from above. Professional divers plunged into the depths, while submersible remotely operated vehicles tracked the jagged seabed. Even the United States Coast Guard joined the fray, sending helicopters to carve precise grid patterns into the sky. For 3 days, the coordinates Brian provided were treated as a sacred map to a living woman, but the ocean yielded nothing. No life jacket, no floating cushion, no sign of Lynette. By April 7th, authorities made the heartbreaking decision to transition from an active rescue to a grim recovery operation. The harsh reality settled in. Lynette was gone and the sea had claimed her. But as the days bled into weeks, the focus of the investigation quietly mutated. What began as a tragic maritime accident began to buckle under the weight of microscopic scrutiny. Investigative journalists, led by relentless local and national true crime outlets, began unearthing details that simply did not align with the narrative of a grieving husband. 10 days after the disappearance, Brian Hooker sat before ABC News cameras in the Bahamas, his face a mask of resolute devotion as he pledged to the world that he would never leave the island, that he would beg anyone who would listen to help find his soulmate. Yet, mere hours after the cameras stopped rolling and the studio lights dimmed,
My only focus is to go back to the boat and then hire or beg people to help me go find some areas to search.
Is that what's next for you?
That's what's next for me until my visa runs out.
Brian boarded a commercial flight and vanished from the Bahamas altogether. His attorney claimed an urgent family illness required his presence at his mother's bedside in Michigan, but to the investigators left behind, the departure felt like a flight from accountability. He left behind an unresolved tragedy, a devastated family, and the very boat where his wife spent her final hours. But most importantly, he left behind a trail of digital breadcrumbs trapped inside the soulmate's electronic systems, including a sophisticated $33,000 forward-looking infrared thermal camera mounted high upon the mast. It was a piece of high-end military-grade tech that recorded automatically, uploaded continuously to an unreachable cloud server, and could see perfectly in the dark. Brian had never mentioned it to the police. If you want to stay with this investigation as it develops and ensure that Lynette's story is never forgotten, please take a moment to subscribe to True Crime Exposure, like this video, share it with fellow true crime enthusiasts, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your support forces these cases to stay in the light. What do you think investigators will find when they unlock the secrets of that dark ocean night? To the outside world, Lynette and Brian Hooker were living a sun-drenched dream that thousands only ever glimpse on a computer screen. After selling their traditional home in Onsted, Michigan, the couple had stripped away the anchors of ordinary life, moving full-time aboard the Soulmate. They transformed their voyage into a digital diary, documenting their freedom across social media and a dedicated YouTube channel. Lynette was a vibrant 55-year-old mother and daughter who remained fiercely tethered to her family back home, despite the thousands of miles of open ocean separating a Caribbean anchorage from the familiar soil of Michigan. But behind the curated videos of pristine beaches and gentle swells lay an entirely different undercurrent, one marked by hidden tensions and a history that left those closest to Lynette harboring deep, unshakable fears. The cracks in the foundation of their tropical paradise extended back over a decade. Court records from Michigan documented a volatile domestic incident in 2015, where local police were called to intervene after Brian and Lynette accused one another of physical assault during a fierce altercation. While local prosecutors ultimately dropped the charges due to insufficient evidence to determine who initiated the violence, the incident remained a permanent, chilling marker in their history. According to Carly Hooker, the darkness within the household ran far deeper than a single documented police report. In a devastating revelation delivered to investigators, Carly recounted that her father had physically harmed Lynette on multiple occasions, detailing a specific, terrifying fight where Lynette claimed Brian had choked her and openly threatened to kill her by throwing her body overboard.
He's already made this threat 2 years ago that this exact thing was going to happen to her, that he would make sure this would happen to her. And he's threatened it, I'm pretty sure, multiple times and has done actions to her that have hurt her. So the fact that this is happening now is kind of coincidental.
Though Lynette left Brian after that encounter, she returned a few months later, stepping back onto the vessel where the threat of the ocean was ever present. As the Soulmate traveled further from the safety of the mainland, the warning signs began to manifest not just in memories, but in the physical reality of the night Lynette vanished. Brian told authorities that the couple left Hope Town at 7:30 p.m. under deteriorating weather conditions, claiming that violent, chaotic waves ultimately bounced his wife off the stern of the small dinghy. Yet, the foundational premise of a tragic, weather-driven accident was instantly challenged by independent evidence. A photograph captured near the anchorage during the exact window of the alleged incident revealed water that was eerily calm, entirely contradicting the narrative of a tempestuous sea capable of throwing a grown woman from a boat. Furthermore, an independent witness near the harbor reported hearing a massive, distinct splash echoing from the direction of the anchored Soulmate at approximately 9:30 p.m. The timing and the location didn't fit. Brian's official story placed the disaster out in the open, moving waters between Hope Town and Elbow Key, but the physical evidence and witness accounts suggested that whatever transpired that night happened right at the boat's side, hours before an alarm was ever raised. The most agonizing red flag for Lynette's family, however, was the staggering expanse of missing time. After his wife disappeared into the black waters, Brian did not immediately seek out help from neighboring vessels or use the radio infrastructure aboard his own ship. Instead, more than 14 hours passed before he made a single phone call to Lynette's mother, Darlene Hamlet, to inform her that her daughter was gone. For over half a day, as a husband allegedly drifted toward shore, a family slept in Michigan, entirely unaware that Lynette was already lost to the sea. When Brian finally left a voicemail for Lynette's daughter, Carly Aleshworth, her suspicion instantly hardened. To Carly's ears, the voice on the recording was not that of a frantic, traumatized man who had just watched his wife drown. It was flat, monotone, and entirely relaxed. It was the tone of a man delivering a routine status report, a detail that deepened a grieving family's conviction that the story being told on the surface was merely a cover for what had actually happened in the dark. The turning point of the investigation did not come from the depths of the ocean, but from the digital memory of the devices Brian Hooker carried ashore. Federal investigators from the United States Coast Guard Investigative Service, working in tandem with Bahamian authorities, bypassed the shifting stories told in interviews and went straight to the forensic data. They extracted the granular GPS tracking information from a marine navigation application running on Brian's phone from the night of April 4th. This data was absolute, an unalterable map of latitude, longitude, and time that recorded exactly where the device traveled, where it paused, and how long it remained stationary, completely independent of human memory or manipulation. When analysts overlaid the physical GPS track against the coordinates Brian had officially provided to the police, the narrative fractured instantly. The digital trail confirmed that Brian's phone had indeed moved out onto the water that night and stopped at a specific location in the Sea of Abaco. However, that stopping point was not the stretch of water between Hope Town and Elbow Key, where Brian claimed the rough water accident had thrown Lynette overboard. It was an entirely different zone altogether, a location in waters approximately 25 feet deep that Brian had never once mentioned to authorities, and where no rescue crews had ever been directed to look. The realization was staggering. For days, as international rescue fleets, divers, and low-flying helicopters burned critical hours searching the coordinates Brian gave them, they had been combing the wrong part of the ocean. A United States official familiar with the investigation later confirmed that Brian had provided physical maps to investigators illustrating a specific route for the dinghy, a route that his own phone's internal data completely refuted. The discrepancy forced a chilling question to the center of the probe. If a man's wife had just vanished into the dark sea, why would he guide the search crews miles away from the actual coordinates his boat visited that night? The discovery of this hidden location triggered immediate federal action. On June 2nd, the 154-foot Coast Guard cutter Margaret Norville sailed into Marsh Harbor under a special agreement with the Bahamian government. Aboard were specialized federal divers trained in underwater evidence recovery, high-tech remotely operated vehicles to scan the seafloor, and Maggie, a highly trained forensic cadaver dog from the Broward County Sheriff's Office capable of detecting the scent of human decomposition beneath the water's surface. For 4 intense days, federal teams searched the newly identified coordinates. While Lynette's body was not recovered, sources revealed that the operation was highly successful, yielding critical physical evidence and revealing sharp contradictions between the layout of the physical scene and the sequence of events Brian had constructed. The true nature of what transpired in the ink-black darkness of the Sea of Abaco was ultimately exposed not by a courtroom confession, but by the sound of Brian Hooker's own voice on a secret recording. 2 days after Lynette vanished, Brian placed a phone call to Blaine Stevenson, a fellow cruiser the couple had befriended months earlier in Florida. Stevenson answered, expecting to coordinate search efforts, But as Brian spoke, the narrative began to warp. Details shifted mid-sentence. Timelines regarding the sunset and the firing of emergency flares began to collide into physical impossibilities. Sensing that the truth was slipping away, Stevenson quietly hit record. In his official statements to the Bahamian police, Brian had carefully constructed a story of absolute separation. He claimed Lynette had fallen over the stern, taking the dinghy's safety kill switch lanyard with her, which instantly disabled the motor and left him trapped on board, drifting helplessly in one direction while the current swept her into another. It was a sterile, passive tragedy.
We just bounced off the dinghy in the middle of a little blow. She had the spare dinghy key in her dry bag, which was with her so fast that I think she tried to swim back to the sailboat, back to our sailboat. I yelled to her that I lost an oar, and I threw the anchor out and anchored the dinghy, and I yelled. I couldn't see.
But on the phone with Stevenson, unaware that his words were being permanently captured, Brian's composure splintered, and he uttered a single sentence that changed the geometry of the entire case. When we were trying to get back in the boat, we both of them trying to get back into the dinghy. With those few unscripted words, the passive separation evaporated. Brian had accidentally placed himself in the water right alongside his wife. He described a chaotic, violent scene that never appeared in his police reports, describing Lynette being struck with a flare pistol, sliding a flare down the boat's pontoon stabilizer, and a desperate, mutual struggle as both of them fought to climb out of the dark ocean and back into the small craft. Maritime legal experts analyzing the statements noted the devastating incompatibility. A man cannot be simultaneously dry on a boat bailing out water while watching his wife drift away, and in the water physically wrestling alongside her. In that single, unpolished moment, the tragedy shifted from a cold accident into a terrifying, close-quarters physical altercation. Before we uncover how federal agents trapped this story using forensic science, I want to take a moment to ask, where are you watching from today? Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. Our true crime exposure community spans the globe, and we love seeing where you're joining us from. The physical evidence left behind by the soulmate and its 8-foot dinghy soon became the focal point of a meticulous federal forensic operation. Sometime between May 8th and May 10th, the soulmate abruptly left its anchorage in the Bahamas and began charting a course back toward the United States. Lynette's daughter, Carlia Leshworth, was never notified that the vessel was in motion. However, the Coast Guard Investigative Service was tracking its every move. Approximately 40 nautical miles off the coast of Melbourne, Florida, federal authorities executed a high-seas interdiction, stopping, boarding, and officially seizing the sailboat under federal authority. The soulmate was towed under armed escort to the Coast Guard station in Fort Pierce, Florida, where forensic teams treated the vessel as an active crime scene. Investigators methodically combed the ship from bow to stern, bagging and tagging items, lifting latent fingerprints, and searching for any biological material that could be analyzed. The boat was later transferred to Fort Lauderdale, where heavy machinery hauled the 46-foot vessel completely out of the water for a thorough below-the-line inspection of the hull. Every piece of recovered physical evidence was immediately expedited to the FBI's premier forensic laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, to undergo advanced DNA processing, trace element analysis, and toxicology screening. To ensure absolute precision, federal investigators secured mouth swabs from Lynette's daughter and parents to establish a direct DNA reference profile against any biological traces hidden within the ship's compartments. Simultaneously, investigators focused on the one object central to Brian's defense, the 8-foot hard-bottom dinghy. Seized during the June operation, the small craft was brought to the United States for exhaustive scientific testing. Forensic specialists applied luminol to the interior surfaces, a highly sensitive chemical agent that reacts with the iron in hemoglobin to produce a glowing blue-green luminescence under ultraviolet light. Because hemoglobin can bind to porous surfaces for months, the test is capable of detecting microscopic blood traces even if they have been scrubbed with heavy detergents, washed with soap, or exposed to weeks of corrosive salt water and intense Caribbean sunlight. Alongside impact spatter analysis, which decodes the geometry, size, and direction of stains to reconstruct the physics of a struggle, the forensic team began pulling the true story directly from the textures of the boat itself, independent of any narrative constructed by the defense. As the forensic net tightened in laboratories across the United States, the behavior of the man at the center of the storm grew increasingly erratic. After abruptly leaving the Bahamas under the premise of visiting his ailing mother, Brian Hooker's promised devotion to the search for Lynette seemed to evaporate into the vast landscape of the American mainland. Independent sightings soon began to shatter the image of the grieving, desperate husband. Investigative journalists confirmed that Brian was spotted 1,000 miles away from the Sea of Abaco, browsing the aisles of a Sierra department store in Grand Rapids, Michigan, alongside his daughter Rosie. The visual was jarring to a public following the case. A man who had wept on national television, vowing to never stop looking for his wife, calmly shopping in a retail store while her body remained lost at sea. Further reports tracked his distinct 6'4" frame, ultra-white hair, and Marine Corps tattoo traveling through California and Oregon. He was a man in constant motion, yet entirely static when it came to finding answers. The critical turning point in Brian's post-departure conduct, however, came when federal investigators officially requested an in-depth interview regarding the emerging evidence. The previous statements from his legal team, which had adamantly insisted he was fully cooperative, were instantly replaced by a wall of absolute silence. Sources confirmed that Brian Hooker formally refused to cooperate any further with the federal foreign murder investigation, invoking his right to silence exactly when the technical evidence began to mount. The strategy of silence, while a legal right, signaled an entirely new phase of the conflict. Investigators were no longer asking for Brian's version of the night of April 4th. They were preparing to replace his story entirely with unassailable data. The most explosive piece of that data sat waiting on a secure, third-party cloud server maintained by a marine electronics manufacturer. Federal authorities successfully executed a search warrant utilizing the serial number of the $33,000 FLIR thermal camera mounted on the Soulmate's mast. Because the advanced system was designed to automatically detect heat signatures, track movement, and continuously upload encrypted visual data to a remote server beyond Brian's physical control, it could not be deleted, edited, or erased. As the grand jury process loomed, federal prosecutors possessed a digital witness that could see through the pitch-black night, ready to reveal exactly who was on the deck, who was in the water, and what truly happened before the Soulmate went electronically dark. The human cost of the mystery on the Sea of Abaco echoes loudest in the fierce, unyielding demands for answers from those who loved Lynette most. For her family, the passing of 81 days has not dulled the pain, it has only sharpened their resolve. Lynette's daughter, Carly Aleshworth, who traveled directly to the Bahamas in the wake of the disappearance to walk the decks of the Soulmate and search the coastlines herself, has remained the most visible champion for her mother's memory. Speaking to national networks, Carly described the surreal horror of navigating a tragedy that felt like a cinematic nightmare, yet was her absolute reality. She has refused to let the case fade from public consciousness, openly praising the federal investigators for dismantling the original timeline and aggressively pursuing the newly discovered GPS coordinates. Behind the scenes, Lynette's parents have channeled their profound grief into a direct, public confrontation with the man who claimed to love their daughter. Sitting down with investigative journalists, Darlene issued a chilling warning to Brian and those shielding him, declaring that neither the family nor the United States Coast Guard would ever abandon the hunt for the truth. Her husband stood beside her, exposing yet another hidden layer of the investigation: the existence of a secret, off-the-grid family cabin tied to Brian's inner circle in Michigan, a location that has quietly drawn the attention of tracking teams. The collective voice of the family has transformed the investigation from a cold analysis of maritime data into a relentless moral crusade, ensuring that no matter how far Brian traveled or how quiet his attorneys remained, the memory of Lynette Hooker would continue to demand a reckoning. The investigation into the disappearance of Lynette Hooker ultimately forces us to look far beyond the horizon of the Sea of Abaco, stretching all the way back to the shores of Michigan. In June of 2026, federal law enforcement expanded the scope of their probe, actively seeking security and surveillance footage recorded in Michigan before the couple ever set sail for the Caribbean. This backward expansion of the timeline carries an unmistakable investigative logic. A 1,000-mile detour to subpoena pre-trip footage is not how resources are allocated for a simple maritime accident. It signals that authorities believe the events of April 4th did not begin on the water, but were instead the culmination of decisions, interactions, and preparations set in motion months before the soulmate ever untied its lines. 81 days have passed since Lynette vanished into the darkness. She was a mother, a daughter, and a passionate sailor who chose the ocean as her home because she loved the freedom it promised. Today, her family remains trapped in an agonizing limbo, left without remains to lay to rest, without a grave to visit, and without a definitive resolution. Yet the forensic net continues to widen, drawing together granular GPS tracks, unscripted audio recordings, microscopic physical evidence, and the unalterable thermal memory of a cloud-linked camera system designed to see perfectly in the dark. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime and maintains his innocence through his legal counsel, but the silence he has chosen to maintain stands in stark contrast to the massive digital and physical record currently being decoded by federal forensic specialists at Quantico. The ocean may have swallowed the physical truth of that night, but science and data are slowly forcing the sea to give up its secrets. What do you believe the thermal cloud data and the pre-trip Michigan footage will ultimately reveal about what happened to Lynette Hooker? Drop your theories and insights in the comments below. If you want to ensure this case stays in the spotlight and continue following every breakthrough as it unfolds, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to True Crime Exposure with notifications turned on. Your engagement ensures that the search for justice never slows down. Thank you for watching.